No way. Howdy guys and girls, welcome back to Harper's Shed. My name's Tim. Behind me is my Series 4 RX7 and we're finally going to get back to getting some work done on this thing. I've had a few parts turn up, and also I've had one major acquisition which may work, may not. You'll have to let me know what you think, but strap in, this is going to be a fun one. Alright, so as I said, we're going to get back to work on the RX7. I do apologise for the delay in videos, but we've been waiting on parts to turn up, and a few little decisions sort of had to be figured out. As you may or may not have noticed, the previous videos, I'm still struggling with getting this thing running properly. I did persevere a little bit more, and then after the manifold was machined, put the whole thing back together, I still can't get it to run. I can put oil down it and I'll get it to fire, but once that oil's burnt out of the combustion chambers, so like a 15-second run, it just peters out and dies, and then there's no compression. I haven't bothered doing another compression test. I've had enough with it. I think realistically, it's time for it to come out. Strip it down, see what's going on. If nothing's wrong, brilliant. Put it back together. Not that worried. If something's wrong, I can fix it. It also gives me the opportunity to do some mild port work on it while it's out. The Microtech's going. I've purchased a Haltech for it. And there's one other pretty big change too, which may or may not have spotted in the background. But the turbo that's on it is a Series 5 turbo, and it's not real healthy. So even just from running it, just from the short amount of time that I have, there's already oil coming out through the bearings, and it's not happy. There's a fair amount of shaft play too, so I didn't really want to go and buy another turbo straight up, and I had an idea. So I'll come over here. I brought a supercharger. That is an Eaton M90 screw supercharger, roots blower, off a V6 Commodore, so an L67 3.8 litre V6. Back in the day, I had one, and I did a full rebuild on it, and with essentially a factory supercharger, so no real crazy stuff. It had a smaller pulley on the front and a fair amount of porting, but the unit itself was, as it come. I was able to get somewhere, it was close to 400 horsepower. It had a fair bit of stick in it. Granted, not apples for apples, rotaries versus pistons, but that was a fair amount of stick, and that was also on 14 pounder boost. The roots blowers, really you don't want to push them too high up in the boost range. That's not where they're sort of comfortable. What they're good for is low down, off the mark torque, and that's something that a rotary typically doesn't have. So I thought I'll put the two together, see what happens. Now it's going to require some fabrication, and it's going to require an intake manifold change, and also something I really want to do is I want to keep power steering, air conditioning, and also obviously the alternator as well, and I don't really want to go to an electric water pump. So I'm going to need to rejigger some stuff, and I want to keep it all under the bonnet. So to do that, the manifold's going to get changed. It's going to go back to the 6-port manifold, and I'll show you why in a second. The supercharger is going to sit up on top. The alternator, I'm thinking, this may change, is going to come down on this side. Turbo won't be here, don't forget, it's gone. Bye-bye. I'll have to make a custom exhaust manifold, no issue. The alternator is going to come down on this side, and that will still allow me to put the factory power steering and air conditioning compressor over here. Hopefully. There should be plenty of room. I'm not too worried about it. And also the Eaton M90s don't sit up overly high. They're not a very deep supercharger. And if we'll go back over and have a look, They're also not a particularly long supercharger. They sort of look it in the camera, I suppose, but they're not. And they have a really nice tuck-in elbow around the back. We'll see. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I picked it up for a good price. It's in relatively good condition. We'll go through and service it, and I'll show you what's involved in servicing one of these. They're not a lot, but they do still need to be done. And we'll see how we go. So I'll get the manifold, and I'll show you why I think this will work. Alright, so let me show you why I think this won't be as big of a task as what it could be. Having played with the M90 before on the RX7 Commodores, I know some tricks and bits and pieces with them. Now, one of the biggest things you do when you intercool them is you remove or you machine that bridge out. And what that does is give it a bigger open plenivolume and allows the intercooler plate, which gets sandwiched between that and the lower intake manifold section, it allows the entire surface to see air, because the air comes out of this portion normally. Having done that before, it makes a big difference with the intercooler. Otherwise, your intercooler is only going to see this square portion here. Bring it out, much better. Now, this is the NA 6-port manifold, which that engine is. So that engine was originally a 6-port NA Series 4 engine. Lower section, 6-port. I'm not going to put the valves back in. I really don't think it's going to need it for this. We'll see, but I just don't think it's going to need it. Remember, we're going to have boost on or just off idle, essentially. So, lower section comes up off the engine. Where are we? That direction. This is the front of the engine. So, this portion we don't use. Don't need it. This portion, however, is going to be really, really handy when it comes time to just making effectively a big flat plate to go onto it. That's the same shape as the outline of the base of the supercharger. Now, the plate I get will be pretty thick, so I'll probably try and make it maybe an inch or 3/4 inch thick aluminium plate, so that way I can do sculpting and porting to get it all to flow properly. These are relatively thin and small, but they'll get ported. I'll make sure they work properly. But the width of that is not much bigger than the opening of the supercharger. So it's really not going to be that big of a deal. Now, the other reason why I went for these superchargers, apart from the fact they're fairly cheap, they're really not that expensive. You can buy a pretty good condition one for about 300 bucks. Is this port down here. So this vacuum can, and which leads across and actuates that port, what it does is unloads the supercharger when you're on cruise. So it gets a vacuum line hooked up to it by way of that vacuum teeth. And essentially, whenever you are on cruise or light loads or high vacuum situations, that valve opens and allows the manifold underneath it to breathe past the supercharger or before the supercharger. And what that does is stops extra pressure building in the manifold when you don't need it. Unloads the supercharger, unloads the belt, unloads the engine from, not all, but a majority of the parasitic drag of the supercharger itself. When you plant your foot, your vacuum goes away, that valve shuts, all the air is getting now forced through the supercharger. It's a good system. I like it. It works very well. As I said, on my Commodore, just shy of 400 horsepower, and I was still getting 8.5, 9 litres per 100 cruising down the highway because the supercharger unloads. And then as soon as you want boost, you put your foot down. This will get a water-to-air intercooler, so there's a sandwich plate that goes between that and obviously the manifold that I make for that. And various companies make them. Yellowterra do one. Mace Engineering, they do one. Theirs is actually really good. I like that. It's built out of like a phenolic material that has the core as part of it, like inbuilt in it. So you get a bit of separation between the heat made by the supercharger, which is quite a lot. They do produce heat, and if you don't intercool them, they can be a bit of a pain. So I think that might be where a lot of people do go wrong with supercharging, is they don't intercool, and you end up with a lot of heat build up. So anyway, that's why I think it'll work. Some of the concerns that I have are these run obviously just one big throttle body. Not that big comparatively, but they just run a single throttle body. Now, I don't know how a rotary reacts when you take away the triple butterfly setup in the manifold. No idea. What these do have is they've got an idle air control valve as part of the throttle body, and I think that's going to help a lot with the low down RPM and street manners of this thing, as far as, you know, taking off from a set of lights and coming down to a set of lights. But having said that, I don't know. The next step from here is pull the old manifold off the car, get that out of the way. I want to mount, I'll clean this up, I'll strip all the old oil metering stuff off. I want to mount this to the engine, and then we'll mount it up and see how it fits. I think for now, I'll just crudely sit the supercharger on top of that, and we'll see. I'm also obviously going to have to make a bracket to take the weight of the supercharger, so we'll get gussets that come down from here to the top of the housings, and that'll help a lot. I did have big concerns about these cracking perhaps, but if we gusset it, it won't. So yeah, that's where I'm at. We'll see. Tell me your thoughts. Will it work? Won't it work? Why won't it work? Don't just tell me it won't work. I'd like a reason why not, something I've overlooked. I do have a Haltech, it's an E11 V2 coming. It's actually a brand new unit, old stock obviously, but it's a brand new unit in the box, all the wiring harnesses, everything. So I'm hoping that'll run it. It does say that it'll run 2-rotor, sequential, split ignition, all that, and it also says that it will run a stepper motor idle air control valve. We'll see. I've heard mixed reviews. I've seen mixed reviews online, but we'll see how we go. But that does mean that I can finally get rid of the Microtech. It's gone. It's out. I've had enough of it. So anyway, enough yabbering. Let's set up and get the crap out of the engine bay. everything off. So exhaust manifold, turbo. I pulled the entire exhaust system out from under the car. It's just cobbled together bits and pieces. The turbo intake manifold, gone, and 6-port manifold. So this is where we'll find out if this is even remotely possible or not. The outlet of the supercharger is about sort of in the center if I was to leave the rib, but with it removed it's close to sort of the back edge, close to the very back of the charger. There is the outlet, or the very rearmost of the outlet of the supercharger itself. So how are we going to go? What do we got? Well, I can see a brake line. Yeah, alright. Let me get that brake line and bits and pieces out. We'll try again in a sec. Alright. So I just move some lines at the back. Just sort of push those brake lines at the back to get as far back as I can go. The rear intake is about there, so it's not terrible. Front one, as you can see, is about in line with sort of this casting mark, and the forwardmost portion of the outlet of the supercharger is here, so it's not terrible. It's sitting up a lot higher than I would have liked, so I think because of the way the manifold runs, and we've got a fair old gap just cranking in here, it's still up pretty high. So I like the way it looks. It does look pretty cool. But I'm thinking, let's come over here and have a look. Here's the bonnet going to shut. That's a hard no. I don't think there's any way that bonnet's closing. Let's have a look. It's you keep an eye on it. Here we go. No. No way. Smaller pulley would help, but I've still got probably a good 2 inches before the bonnet even thinks about closing. And that's no alloy plate there for a mount, and no intercooler. Alrighty. That's a bit of an issue. Okay. Been thinking about it for a bit. Possible ways we can fix it to get the bonnet shut, because I really do want this whole setup to sit under the bonnet. Now, the pulley alignment, if we sit straight edge on there and we come down, not fantastic. It's a long way forward. So we need to get this front pulley further back. Now, we want, realistically, we want to come back to sort of there somewhere with the front of the pulley, which puts, we essentially want the front of the pulley needs to come back to about here. So we get, a good 1.5 inches back. I can machine the snout, remove or replace the front bearing, move it further back, bring the whole kit and caboodle further back. That'll help a lot with closing the bonnet. So that's step one. Step two is we need to try and remove some of this excess height under here. That's not a real good angle. Come over here. Some of this excess height under here. So we've got sort of, 2 finger widths, 2 good finger widths of height we can come down. Now my theory, well, not theory, but my idea is to turn this 2-piece manifold into a 1-piece manifold. So if I remove that flange, bring them together, and then weld them seam to seam all the way around, because I can get all the way around, fully weld it, that gives me, let's get a ruler. that will give me an extra, what are we, to there, to there, gives me an extra 20 mil, so 3/4 of an inch. That's a pretty decent slab. That alone I still don't think is going to get me though, because that's the thickness of the plate that I need to make to mount this onto is going to be at least 10 mil. So 10 mil alloy plate welded to this, to that. The next thing I think I can do is, because I'm welding it, I can get rid of that plate. So that gives me, or my plate that I put on will basically be about that thick. But I can also machine it down so that it's essentially level with that. Which will get me, can't get the ruler in there, but that'll get me another probably 15 mil, 20 mil. I think then we are getting in the realm of being able to shut the bonnet. So some of the other things I'm going to have to remove, this boss off the top of the thermostat housing, it's going to have to go. Doesn't matter, it's for the alternator anyway, which won't live there. I think it's going to come close. What I'm going to do, pull the charger off the top. I'm going to take this upper intake manifold section off. I'm going to just sit the charger straight down on the top of the block and see. We'll see if the bonnet closes then, because if the bonnet doesn't even close then, it's just not going to happen. We'll see what that looks like. Alright, so we're on a block of wood. Possibly still go lower. You know, taking out the fact the intake manifold won't let me when I remove that boss. But we'll see if the bonnet will ever come close to close. Oh. Ooh, very close. Ooh, that was sharp. That was sharp. I know. Bearing in mind, the pulley I'm going to be running is going to be quite a bit smaller than that. And it'll also be a lot further back. So right now, it's on a pretty big rib of the bonnet. So I've actually got some room I could cut out of there and make some more clearance. The other thought I had while I was pulling the manifold off is that I can't turn this into a one piece because I've got my primary injectors. So that's a scrap. But I can machine these right down so they're open, essentially removing all that material there, that full section of height. Where'd my ruler go? There it is. And that would give me, if I was to pull it from the top of there to essentially the top of there, so you're talking 20 mil there. And also, the other thing that would allow me to do is it would get these intake runners to be a lot more oval and not so round. So in theory, the flow would actually go a little bit nicer. It would be an absolute nightmare to weld, getting down in and around here, but I like a challenge. So there's options. There's options. But it looks cool. Come on, it's got it just does. I don't think it'll have any effect on any of my air conditioning and power steering on this side. I may have to do some modification. I will have to do some modification to the outlet of the water. Inlet of the water pump. And probably have to put that on a bit of a sharper 90 and bring it down a bit more just to give clearance for the alternator. But I reckon I can make it work. So everything's doable with an angle grinder and a welder. Anyway, I think that's going to be it for now. I'm going to do some more mucking around with the manifolds. See how I go. I'm also not against, it's just going to be a lot of work. Not against making a custom one. But that's a lot of work. I don't really know if I want to get into something that may not even eventuate. Alright, that's it for now. And more progress to come, but I think we're going to get this thing happening. Hopefully my computer will turn up soon. We can make it go. Alright, catch you later.